And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather showing low pressure continues to move northward here and slowly weaken as it approaches the southwest Seward Peninsula coast. So coming around the bottom side of that as it lifts northward, a return to snow and blowing snow across the southwest interior, snow showers into Bristol Bay, snow and blowing snow here along the lower Yukon River where there's a winter storm warning out, winter storm warning Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island as well. And blizzard warning continues for the eastern Arctic coast and also the western Arctic coast with a winter weather advisory on the central coast, so not much change there coming up. New low here develops and moves up to the Kenai Peninsula, just south of actually Resurrection Bay there. That'll increase moisture along the North Gulf Coast. Snow heavy at times, northern panhandle, dry to the south. Next system out here to the west moves northeastward. The whole system kind of comes eastward here, but the main push is up to the northeast. This one continues to lift into the Chukchi Sea, and snow and wind slowly diminishing throughout the day. Another day of storm force easterly winds on the eastern Arctic coast. This slow moving system here will bring a shot of snow across south central Alaska, Kenai Peninsula, and into the Copper River Basin. Actually a chance of snow over much of the eastern interior all the way up to the North Slope. And again, snow in the northern panhandle, lighter amounts of rain or snow down to the south. And well, the rain will be along the coast down to the south. Any elevation at all will still be in the form of snow. And for Monday, still some snow chances, northern panhandle. Temperatures a little warmer, especially along the coast, highs maybe in the lower 40s. And as this system pushes northward here, we've got storm warnings in the Chukchi Sea, snow and blowing snow again over the northwest and western interior, much lighter precipitation and winds as you head south here. High pressure, light winds. Variably cloudy to clear skies from the eastern Aleutians right on up into south central Alaska and northward across the eastern interior. And actually not too bad across the entire Aleutian chain. And for coastal water forecast, southeast winds on the south coast there at 20 to 25 knots. For the central coast, east to southeast winds 30 knots and east to southeast 25 to 30 knot winds on the north coast. Lynn Canal, south winds 20 gusts 35 knots. Stevens Passage, south winds at 15 knots and southeast winds 15 knots for Clarence Strait. And for the day Monday, for the north coast up here, we've got north winds at 15 knots. Central coast, south to southeast winds at 15 to 20 knots. And then for the south coast, southeasterlies 20 to 25 knots. Central southern inside waters, in fact, all of the inside waters, southeast winds at 20 knots with higher gusts. Prince William Sound, south winds 20 knots, and for much of the North Gulf Coast, winds will be southwest at 20 knots, southwest 20 knot winds for Cook Inlet, west winds at 20 knots, Kamishak Bay across the Barren Islands. And for Monday, winds go back to the north and northeast here for Cook Inlet, but on the light side at about 10 to 15 knots, northwest 15, 3-foot seas for Prince William Sound, and north becoming northwest there for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands, 20 knots. Same thing for the western North Gulf Coast. Eastern North Gulf Coast, north winds 15 to 25. Kodiak Island, west winds at 20 knots tomorrow. Bristol Bay, west winds 20 knots. Alaska Peninsula, west winds 20 to 25 knots. And for the Alaska Peninsula on Monday, variable winds 10 to 15 knots. Again, higher pressure really lightening the winds up, laying them down pretty good in this area. Southeast at 10 or variable to southeast at 10 for Bristol Bay, and variable winds 10 to 15 knots for Kodiak Island. And for the eastern Aleutians tomorrow, south to southwest winds 20 to 30 knots. Gale warnings, Adak and Atka, south winds 40 knots. And some storm warnings here for Amchitka Island, south at 50 knots and southwest 35 to 40 knot 30 to 45 knot winds for the western Aleutians. And for Monday, western Aleutians here, west winds 25 to 30 or 20 to 35 knots. Gales for the Adak-Atka area from the south at 35. And the eastern Aleutians here looking at winds from the south and southwest at 15 to 25 knots. And for the southwest coast, here south of Nunivak Island, west winds 25 knots. Gale warnings for west winds at 35 knots here along the Yukon Delta coast to St. Lawrence Island. Pribilof, St. Matthew Island, small craft advisories for southwest winds. And then those will become gales on Monday here. 35 knots from the southwest for the Pribilof seas near 20 feet. Southwest 40 for St. Matthew Island, seas at 20 feet. South 30 knots for the Kuskokwim Delta Coast, 40 knots for the Yukon Delta Coast, and south 45 knots for St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound. And for tomorrow, another storm force wind day for the eastern Beaufort Sea coastline, out of the east at 50 knots, 40 knots for the central coast, 35 knot gales out of the east for the west side, and east to northeast 25 to 30 knots for the Chukchi Sea. Those will increase dramatically on Monday. Southeast winds 45 to 55 knots through this area. Southeast gales for the western Arctic coast, but becoming lighter here, especially on the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, where winds will come down to 15 to 20 knots.